Welcome back to the Sampanviking on China channel. And this is a discussion about US genocide in Afghanistan. And I do this because the narrative that has been put out for the last few years now about the Chinese treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, China, is a fantasy which actually only reflects the reality of the US treatment of the Afghan population subjugated under its puppet regime that has recently fallen. It almost defies satire. You really couldn't make this up. It, I don't know where really to begin. As the Americans now leave Afghanistan, we are told that there are 20 million people facing starvation and chronic drought. And what are the Taliban going to do about it? Well, I think the question surely has to be, after 20 years of US management, after 20 years of US-led nation building, after 20 years and trillions of dollars investment and bringing all that is good of Western liberal democracy to this poor benighted country, how the hell can there be nearly 20 million people on the brink of starvation? What has happened? What has gone wrong? Either this is gross incompetence on a massive scale, or it is deliberate. But either way, it amounts to a form of genocide. The death or potential death of 20 million people through lack of food and water is genocidal. There is no other phrase to describe it. Likewise, we are now also told that this humanitarian crisis it can't be helped because the Taliban won't have access to the $9 billion US dollars worth of funds held on behalf of the Afghan government abroad. In other words, the US won't let them have that money. So not only are there 20 million people on the brink of starvation, the funds that the new Taliban-led government would need in order to alleviate their plight is being deliberately withheld by the people responsible over the last 20 years for bringing this situation about in the first place. Words fail me. This is a rank hypocrisy of the highest order. This is disingenuous lunacy of a type that it does defy satire. You just cannot describe. And of course, then of course we have the actual military action as well. Let alone the slow death through starvation and thirst. We have the sudden and violent death caused by U.S. military action. The drone strike on the last day of or just before the last day of the US occupation ended, 30th of August, supposedly against a suicide bomber, definitely did take out a family of 10, mostly women and children. And this, again, is not unusual because at least, depending who you listen to, at least half of the casualties of all the many and regular drone strikes carried out by the US forces during the 20 years of the occupation have been collateral damage, i.e. innocent civilians. Now, this is the situation that's been going on since the US started bombing and invading back in 2001. It's gone on without let or hindrance. It's simply, when we haven't known about it, hasn't been reported on. And even now, the media are reporting as if all these problems are suddenly the Taliban's fault. And there's so many strange and unanswered questions. I'll just quickly add, of course, that the suicide bombing that did happen at Kabul airport last week was again a particularly mysterious event. Clearly, given the nature of the warnings that the United States was issuing, they knew it was coming, which means that they knew who it was and they knew why. And it leaves plus the fact they were able to target and kill presumably the person that they held responsible within 24 hours rather suggests that this was an asset of the United States intelligence that had suddenly become rogue, and a liability. So how did they know that a suicide bombing was coming, that an attack was imminent? Well, I imagine that during a conversation with them between a CIA operative, probably telling him the bad news that he'd been sold down the river and that everything he'd been promised by them wasn't going to happen, he probably said, "You treacherous SOBs, I'm going to kill you," which is a pretty good intelligence source and analysis that something is about to happen, especially if they have been set up, trained and primed, ready to do similar things, usually perhaps the targets of the United States preferences. Well, compare this. I mean, this is the reality so this is liberal democratic nation building in Afghanistan compared to genocide in Xinjiang. And what does that genocide actually mean? Well, it means nipping extremism in the bud and dealing with it through investment locally, through education, and through de-radicalization. Um, China has not been drone striking suspected militants in Xinjiang. They have not been opening fire on crowds in Xinjiang in the hope of killing a few militants and the devil take those unfortunate enough civilians collateral damage to get in the way. Where the United States has bombed in Afghanistan, the Chinese have built in Xinjiang. Where the Americans have oppressed and kept down in Afghanistan, the Chinese have raised up and educated in Xinjiang. There have been no drone strikes. There have been no military bases raining down fire at the slightest provocation on the local populace. There has been a slow, steady education and development-led campaign by the Chinese government in Xinjiang to raise living standards, and by dint of that, to remove the need, the feeding of extremism by removing the fire from the belly of the population that lived there, and by giving people the better life that presumably would drive people to extremism in the first place, if they can get it like anybody else through moderate means. You will always change that before you resort to militancy and extremism. And the Chinese have demonstrated what true nation building looks like, as they have built nations within their own country, built local communities, built provinces, built the economies of all the various ethnic groups that live in Xinjiang to something that, when you walk around and look, is recognizable to those of us that live in the West. All the stories that have been told, you never see Uyghurs because they're all in concentration camps. You never hear the Uyghur language being spoken. You never see Uyghur script. Well, the fact that so many people living in China are able to go to Xinjiang and record videos of life there. You see plenty of people who are obviously Uyghurs. And yes, they have kids, and quite often quite a few kids with them. You hear them speaking the Uyghur language. Anybody who knows what Chinese dialects sound like, most of the Han Chinese dialects sound like Mandarin, Cantonese, and the other local dialects, will recognize immediately that Uyghur is a different language from a different language group altogether. It is easy to recognize. And of course, Uyghur script is everywhere. And as a Turkic script, it is again very, very different from Han Chinese characters and easy to spot. In other words, the fairy stories that have come out of the USA about Xinjiang genocide are no less fanciful than the fairy stories coming out of the USA about Afghan nation building. And in fact, the warped looking glass world that the US presents is one in which the precise opposite is actually true in either case. That is it really from me on this one. It's a short rant about absolute lunacy. I will add, of course, that the announcement today by President Joe Biden that America's finished with nation building may surprise many of us who hadn't noticed it actually start, but the pretense of nation building has now come to an end. As I said in the in a video about a week ago, expect to see troops now leave Iraq and parts of Syria within a year, because the United States has given up on its Middle Eastern adventure. It hasn't worked, and all it can do now is switch its attention to the Asia Pacific, where, as Ms. Harris, the Vice President of the United States, is currently trying to drum up support for the United States in the Asia Pacific region, really demonstrates that this is exactly where the United States is going to concentrate its efforts from now. Europe, of course, taking, as they say, more responsibility for its own defence. In other words, sorry lads, you're on your own. We've got to look after ourselves. So I think the shape of this decade is starting to become visible. It will be a United States purely active in the Asia Pacific area, not really interested elsewhere. Europe having to look after itself in the Atlantic region. Well, how exactly this goes over the course of the next few months, we shall see. But I think things are going to move fairly quickly in a lot of areas. So we will have plenty of things to look at, digest, and discuss over the course of the not too distant future. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will wish to join me again for future videos. If you do, please subscribe, please ring the bell. That will make sure that you know when future videos come out. If you'd like other people to have a listen to what I have to say, please share. If you would like to leave a comment, I'd be only too delighted to read it and reply if it is appropriate. Until next time, look forward to seeing you soon.